Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of React Native Radio. I'm Josh Justice, one of the panelists. Another panelist we have is Charles Max Wood.
Hey guys.
And our special guest today is Mitch Masia. Say hello, Mitch.
Hi, everybody.
So Mitch, why don't you introduce yourself real quick, talk about who you are, what you do, and why you're famous.
Well, I don't think famous is the right word, but I am a software engineer based in Chicago. I love the JavaScript ecosystem. I work a lot in React Native, Node, and right now I'm working on a new project to build a financial research platform.
Infinite Red is a US-based consultancy specializing in React and React Native. They do mobile app and web design and development. They are deeply involved in the React and React Native open source communities, publish the React Native newsletter with 10,000 subscribers, and are involved with the React Native core development. If you have a project and need design or engineering help from an experienced team to take it all the way from concept to completion, get in touch with Infinite Red. Also check out Chain React, the React Native conference, which is hosted by Infinite Red in July in Portland with 500 developers from all around the world. You can find them at infinite.red. Make sure to mention you heard about them in this ad.
Very cool. You want to give us a bit of an intro to that new product and kind of what it entails?
Sure. So the product is called EEON, and we're working in a space where there's been an explosion recently of zero commission trading apps, but there's not a great sophisticated platform where everyday investors can go and get the information they need to make more informed decisions. Right now, what they have in a lot of the trading apps is fairly basic, so we're looking to expand on that.
Yeah, I've done a little bit of homework on some of that stuff, just personally, and yeah, usually you get like some sheet with like 4 numbers on it, 5 numbers on it, so it's like earnings to, I can't remember all the terms, but yeah.
You'll normally get PE, price to sales, stuff like that. Yeah. But we're digging a little deeper. We've created our own rating system. We're doing real-time visualizations, and we give you data on all of the financial statements, which is great as well.
Yeah, those are the kinds of things. Yeah, the financial statements, the strength of their leadership, all of the other things that, because I'm not looking at just the numbers, right? The numbers tell me kind of where it's at now. If I'm investing, I want to know where it's going.
Right. You're really looking for long-term value.
Right.
And we're just trying to help expose that for people.
Yep. Makes total sense. So as you build this app, then I'm assuming there's some form of, a back end that hits APIs, gathers data, and then makes it available to me. And then, on the front end, it makes it, easy to kind of look and see, okay, charts as far as how the numbers have changed over time and things like that to give me an idea of what trends are going on. How did you pull all this?
So, it's been a really interesting journey. Our backend, our data store is Postgres, and then all of our real-time functionality is powered by Redis, specifically Redis Pub sub, which is awesome. It really has been fantastic to work with. The backend I originally started with was a service-oriented architecture, but being just a one-man team right now, and I do have a technical advisor who's worked on financial systems before, having multiple services has been really tough. So just last week, actually, I combined 2 of the services I was working on, and that's really taken off some of the pain. The data fetching layer is GraphQL, and we use GraphQL subscriptions with Apollo for the real-time data transfer. And then our front end is React Native with Expo. And right now we're only focusing on iOS, but Android should be out later in 2020.
I'm a little curious too, why put this all into an app instead of, a lot of people would just put this information on a web page and allow people to find it with a search engine. Yeah,
sure. So it's kind of been done on the web. There are a lot of fantastic systems for it, and it's a relatively solved problem. But on mobile, there are incredibly sophisticated tools, but not much that's approachable and something you could just check multiple times a day or keep open on an iPad or phone or whatever. And that's a niche we're sort of going after here.
That makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the other thing is that I used to be the guy that would open my browser on my phone and look stuff up. But more and more, if there's an app for it, I tend to opt that way. And I think a lot of other people are moving that way. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, the initial download process of an app can be a little painful, but for frequent usage, there's really nothing better.
The interesting thing for me is that as much as I love the app, I love the web, I love to support it. But when you don't know if a given website has been made with very much mobile thinking in mind, even in 2019, right. Like that's one of the nice things that like you download an app, you know it's made with a phone in mind. And even, sometimes even just with that initial process, another random thing is logins, where it's like, website logins can time up pretty quickly, but apps they're thinking about the mobile use case. And so they tend to keep you logged in longer. So just funny things like that like could totally be done just fine on the web. But as far as like the consistency of quality of what you're looking for on a phone, I found myself reaching for apps more frequently too.
Yeah. And if we're really going for like high performance, something that's going to really be delightful for people, we had to go with the app. And, React Native and Expo, for us being a startup, was sort of a clear choice. I personally have a lot of experience with React Native and Expo. I've pushed out a couple apps with them. And I don't have just pure native experience in Swift or Java or Kotlin. So this is what we wanted to go for now, and it's working out great.
This sounds like an app that's a great fit for Expo. I mean, you're getting information from the web, you're displaying it. I know Expo can do a lot more, but there's nothing particularly like device intensive that you're looking to hook into that you might need a custom native integration. So yeah, it seems like any of the downsides or the things that are more challenging with Expo or might cause you to need to eject just aren't very likely at all. So we can get all the upsides of Expo very easily, it seems.
Exactly. And yeah, I was super pumped about that because the Expo development cycle is fantastic, with their over-the-air updates and everything. So I was really excited that we get to use that for this project instead of, the manual configuration that comes with a vanilla build.
So I'm a little bit new to Expo. I've kind of played with it a little bit. I'm just curious, how did you pull that in and what does the process look like for getting started with it?
So just getting started with Expo is really easy. They've got a great CLI for initializing projects. And, you can either do that as a plain blank project. You can do it with navigation built in. They might have another template. I'm not sure. But once you initialize the project, it comes with a ton of baked in configuration for you. You don't have to do maps. You don't have to do linking of a lot of standard native libraries, which you would normally use in a React Native project.
Let me say something big picture, just in case some of our listeners have not run across Expo before. The way I understand it is that you could maybe describe Expo as kind of a wrapper around React Native. Mm-hmm. So you wouldn't add it to an existing React Native app so much as when you're starting, you decide, hey, I'm going to build this in Expo and initialize the project that way. And then that way, I don't have the Android project and the iOS project in my code base. It's abstracted away by Expo, and I'm just working in JavaScript. Is that a fair summary, Mitch?
Yeah, absolutely. You're living in the JavaScript world. I've heard it described as Rails for React Native.
Yeah. That's the way that I've kind of heard it described too, where it basically gives you a few more conventions and a good place to start as far as like generating code, things like that.
Mm-hmm. So I can't say in the long term of whether or not we'll have to eject eventually, but for now, and we're working on a private beta right now, it's been great. People have been enjoying it. We're getting great performance out of React Native, and Expo has not hindered us at all. It's really been a boost.
So on a small side project that I did recently, I was doing some push notifications, obviously very common on mobile. And those were just so easy to get going and get started in Expo, whereas the choices weren't as clear for me in React Native CLI. I also ended up doing some audio playback in that, and the audio APIs were super, super simple in Expo as well. I'm curious, Mitch, like what kinds of Expo APIs have you reached for other than just like, just displaying React Native screens and stuff like that? Like what has Expo provided that's been useful in that regard?
The biggest real win we get out of Expo is the build process, where, just off the cuff, they manage iOS build certificates and all that sort of minutia for you. But they've got over-the-air updates baked in. Push notifications has been great, like you said. but we don't really have to tap into a whole lot of the native APIs for this, which is great.
Are you guys using the over-the-air updates currently?
We are. Yeah.
Cool. Has that worked pretty reliably and easily?
Yeah, absolutely. Unless you need to do a version upgrade on React Native, or you need to change. Expo has what's called a app.json. It's basically a manifest file, which is just some build time configuration. Unless you have to update that, where you'll have to actually run a full build and submit to the App Store, the OTA updates have been great. And we've got multiple accounts set up. So we've got a internal company account with a couple different release channels, which is a feature of Expo. So you can have development, staging, and production channels. And we've also got a public account where we publish the same app, but through a different Expo account, which we're able to share with people that we want to give it to test, which it originally helped us avoid some burdens with test flight. But now it just works great for getting someone set up really simply.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So talk to us a little bit about your GraphQL setup.
So we use GraphQL with Apollo on the front end and the back end. We use the Apollo Server Express integration on the back end because we need to support webhooks from Stripe and other various services. So we also need that REST interface there. And we love using Apollo on the front end as well because of their caching mechanism. And when you have strong types and unique IDs, all of the updates happen in place. And it's just a super smooth developer experience without having to manage a ton of state manually, like we used to have to do with Redux.
Are you using TypeScript to manage your types, or?
We are not using TypeScript. Personally, I've done projects in TypeScript, and I always find myself fighting the compiler. And strong typing does have its benefits, of course, but having the strong contract via GraphQL between our front end and back end has given us some of those benefits just out of the box without having to deal with TypeScript.
Gotcha. I've just heard different people, at different stages basically run into, some of the issues around typing where, they they either have to kind of force everything into something that works with GraphQL's strong typing, or they just wind up sort of creating analogs in TypeScript and then everything seems to work okay. So I was just curious.
Yeah, I think it might be more necessary if we had a larger team working on this to keep everybody in sync.
Right.
But GraphQL and the developer experience provided there through Graphical and some of the other tools have really allowed me personally to move fast and also share a lot of information with the team about what fields are available to us in order to just build faster and push features instead of spending a lot of time writing documentation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that communication aspect, you mentioned, something about sharing GraphQL. I don't know if it was the type declarations or something. Are those is that information shared between the back end and the React Native front end, or is it just on the back end side, like those files or configurations?
Yeah. So I've worked for a couple different companies, and the magic string problem has hit us a couple times wherever I've worked. So when I was starting out on this project...
Can you explain the magic string problem real quick?
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Absolutely. It's really just when you have a set of constants that need to be available to multiple services or on your front end and back end, and you end up retyping or copy pasting the constants instead of just, using some sort of shared library for constant management. So we have a repo just of the constants that we need throughout the application that can be consumed on the front end or the back end. And that's been super helpful in terms of creating GraphQL enums and doing, permission checking. If we need to see if someone is on a specific subscription or a specific plan, we have constants and we have utilities baked into those constants and into that constants library to say whether or not, hey, are they on a paid plan? Can they see this data? So I tried to be pretty thoughtful when I was starting out here about how can I make a more seamless dev experience throughout the stack.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious.
And sorry, that goes, that speaks to creating constants that can be consumed anywhere and shared utilities. And then one thing I'm really proud of for this project is right at the start, I worked really hard to get a very consistent build and release process set up. So I'm a big fan of conventional commits and this library called semantic release. Are you guys familiar with those?
I have heard about it, but have not used it.
Conventional commits is a standard for writing commit messages that can be parsed in a machine readable way. And semantic release is a pluggable process for releasing your software. So I have it set up so that it parses all of my commit messages, which are tagged with either fix, feature, refactor, style, test, whatever. It will automatically bump the version of the software, run a build, push it out, deploy it if it's a service, if necessary, and then create a Git tag for it and push that as well. So when we have this shared constants library, it goes through this semantic release process every time I push to CI. And then I just have a new tag on GitHub that I can integrate into any library and any service that we have.
Oh, nice.
Mm-hmm. And I'm really happy with the way that's been going. It's a great project, and I would recommend anybody to check it out.
I'm curious to dig into your GraphQL subscriptions. Obviously financial data changes very fast, but not always, that data is not always available. So like you have feeds that are giving you very quick updates to financial information you could feed through to the end user.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we have a couple different data providers. The one that gives us real-time data is called IEX. It's the Investors Exchange, and they've got a great REST API. One of their endpoints supports server-sent events. So you just open up a streaming connection to that. They push you data on some interval that you specify. Right now, we are getting incoming quote data on 8,000 securities every 5 seconds.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So
I signed up for a DDoS. Congratulations.
Thanks. I haven't had a whole lot of experience in this like big, relatively more data realm before, but it's been really interesting. And so far, just in our lab environment with a couple testers, it's been fine. We're taking all of those updates and using Redis Pub sub. So we're publishing the updates onto Redis, and then we have a consumer there that goes and determines whether or not real-time alerts have to be fired, and then uses GraphQL subscriptions with their async iterator to push all of that quote data to the clients that subscribe to it.
When I first started taking computer science classes in college, I thought programming was just a joke. In fact, I changed my major over to engineering and started doing computer engineering and chip design. Then I found Ruby, and I fell in love. I love Ruby. It was my first real programming language where I dove deep and really learned how to make software that makes a difference for other people. Since then, and the way that we got started with devchat.tv, we started a show called Ruby Rogues. It's currently in the 400s of episodes. We've talked to hundreds of people in the Ruby community, about the Ruby programming language, about Rails, and about what makes good programming. So if you're interested in Ruby Rogues, or you just want to hear a long series of experienced programmers talking about real problems, then go check out rubyrogues.com.
So, it's worked so far in our lab setup, and I'm not exactly sure how it's going to scale, but problems will arise and we'll take care of them when they do.
Yeah, that's kind of the life in a startup, right? Is we handle all the stuff we think we're going to run into, and then go play firefighter on the rest.
Mm-hmm. But you can only do so much. You have to pick and choose your battles, and that's been the hardest part of this whole process is saying no and making the decisions about, okay, what do we actually need to do right now and what can be deferred?
Yep. Yeah, I definitely understand that. I've been working on a software as a service project for podcasters, and yeah, it's interesting just to see, how much of this stuff it's like, oh, okay, we like this, we don't like that. we're going to push that off to the next version or future version, and going in and fighting the fires on some of this stuff, and deciding what goes on the client and what goes on the back end. And it's really, really interesting to see where it all goes. But most of what we're doing too is data management, and it sounds like that's mostly what you guys are doing. So it's kind of interesting. It's like, okay, so what gets what needs what, and just working that problem until you get to a workable solution.
Yeah, exactly. So far, I'm pretty happy with where we are. Redis has really been a savior for us. We use it as a cache. We use it as a pub sub mechanism. We use it to manage the GraphQL subscriptions, and I can't praise it enough. It's excellent. I love the API they expose. We use hosted Redis through Redis Labs, and they've got some really neat modules that allow you to store JSON natively and do search, and those have come in really handy.
So how do you? Well, it's more of a back end question than I really want to ask them, but this is
React Native. Okay.
So maybe we'll have you on JavaScript and we can dive into this stuff a little more.
Sure.
I had a front-endy question.
Go.
Yeah. So we talked about how you access the data and get it updated in real time. Tell us about how you kind of display or visualize the data.
Yeah, absolutely. So
that's way better than what I was going to ask, Josh.
Okay. So we use GraphQL subscriptions, and because Apollo manages the cache for us, every time we push new quote data, every 5 seconds, if somebody's looking at a specific security, the data gets automatically merged into the cache, the screen re-renders, and generally we've designed the app to be fairly iOS-y, with big text and a lot of white space and whatnot, following their sort of like iOS 11 paradigm. And then in terms of visualizations, this was a huge challenge. Have you guys done any charting in React Native?
I have not.
Nope.
So there's a couple libraries out there that try and do it. Some of them are SVG based, some of them are Canvas based, but I didn't find a great solution. I've done some charting in it before where I used a library called Victory Native. I believe it's by Formidable Labs, but it just didn't suit all of our needs for this project because we have live streaming data that we're trying to visualize, and also large data sets. So we might have 5 years of historical data that we're trying to show close, we're trying to show percent change, and could be multiple trend lines on the same graph. So what we actually ended up doing is using a web view. So we use this library called React Native eCharts Wrapper, which has been fabulous. eCharts is a web charting library, super performant, great sane default. I've had a great time working with it. The documentation can be a little difficult, but I really love the library. And we actually just use that wrapped in a web view. We use the post message and on data callbacks to communicate with that web view. And it's worked out great.
So I assume the performance is good enough then, even though it's going through a web view with your real-time data coming in, it looks good enough that it's not like flickering and redrawing or anything like that?
No, not only is it not flickering, it's animating really well.
Oh, wow.
So, kudos to the library, kudos to the people that work on eCharts. It's been excellent.
Yeah, I know some, I don't know what the proper term is, Swift developers, I guess. I was going to say real mobile developers, but that's not fair.
No.
Swift developers do iOS development and things like that. And yeah, it's a trick that they use for some of this stuff too. It's like, this is the tricky part of the UI. It doesn't really need any of the native controls. So they wind up pulling in some web library and they just render it web-wise.
Mm-hmm.
So Chuck, what you're saying is these iOS developers are creating what you might call a hybrid app. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it's and They just style everything out so that it looks like it's part of the same UI, and you can't tell. So
yeah, that's what we've done as well.
Interactive and everything too when they need to. So yeah.
One thing that was a little tricky with this library is loading up the web view, because it goes through this initialization process. You actually have to inject the HTML and JavaScript into it. It loads it up. It has a white screen for a second, but we got around that with a pretty easy absolute overlay. And then we just have like a timeout and also a callback on when the screen is loaded. And we delay that a little bit, and it comes out to a really nice render.
Trade-offs like that are so interesting, because you could look at that and say like, oh, like it's so unfortunate we have to work around the web view and stuff like that. It would be great to avoid a web view. And yet when it comes to reinventing the wheel and somebody creating a huge charting library from scratch, it just may not be feasible. And so it's like the workaround for that loading behavior is way smaller than any kind of work that would be necessary to have like a purely native or purely React Native charting library.
Yeah, absolutely. But, it's a decision you have to make in a startup like this. Is it really worth the time? And, it feels a little bit like cheating, but it's okay. It's fine. It works great. So what can we do?
Yep.
So on the topic of GraphQL, you've bumped into a soapbox of mine, or maybe another way to say it is a big question of mine when it comes to GraphQL.
Ooh,
so I haven't. You are way more informed than me, so don't worry. This is not a trap. This is a learning experience for me. So I haven't used GraphQL in production. I play with it some on the side. I've got like a research week actually coming up that I'm going to be working in it some. And one of the things is I've gone through the tutorials on howtographql.com, a great tutorial website. Mm-hmm. One of the things that was just really surprising to me in React and in Vue.js as well is when you get to the point where you're in this tutorial, where you're writing data to the server, there's a step where you manually update the local cache. Like you have a list of things, you created a new thing. And then it's like you implement a function that says, okay, I'm going to manually update the locally cached data so that I see the results right away without having to query to the server. Now, when you talked about the cache, you talked about the cache automatically updating, which sounds great. And that's exactly what I want, because it's manually updating it seems very low level and just the kind of thing that you're talking about, like that is great to be able to stay away from. So can you talk about the automatic updating of the cache? And is there a certain aspect of Apollo client I should be looking for that?
Sure. So that's kind of two questions. The first one, I think you're talking about optimistic updates. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. In this app, we've chosen not to do optimistic updates. You certainly can do it, but you do have to write your own updating function. And, it's okay if the UI calls for it and that's the decision you make. Great. Like it's certainly doable. For us, though, we just put in a loading state and then let the cache automatically update. So the automatic updates, we've run into a couple issues with them, but we're able to get past most of them. I would say the one gotcha is that you actually need to return a unique ID for the objects that you're trying to merge. That's how Apollo extracts and knows, what actual instance of an object this is. And you can provide your own function to figure that out. I think it's called extract ID from data or something like that when you configure the Apollo client. But as long as you have unique IDs and you can return those, we found that the cache updating is pretty seamless.
That makes sense that this is a different use case because, in the tutorial, it's the user creating some data and so wanting to send that up to the server and update it in the local cache. Whereas it sounds like the main case that you're referring to is, you got that subscription, you got more data coming in from the server. So it makes sense that those would operate differently and use different parts of Apollo.
But also when you're just doing mutations, there's this concept called fat mutations, where anytime you're actually updating data, you want to return the entire updated object so that you can just say like, hey, I want to update a user. I want to change their first name. We're going to do that. And that mutation returns another user. So you just request their first name back. You request the ID back. And Apollo is smart enough to go ahead and update that in the cache. And your entire app re-renders, which is great. Mm-hmm. So it's really been a pleasure to work with. On the React Native front, though, One other thing we ran into a lot was animations. And, we're trying to build a great looking app here. So do you guys have any experience with animations? Because this has been a real journey for me.
I've only played with the built-in animation, Animatable, I think might be the name of it, functionality. I've heard of other, in the last couple of years, more recent libraries, but I haven't gotten to play with them. What approach did y'all take?
Yeah, I was going to say I played with GreenSock and trying to remember. I've played with some of the Angular animation libraries. I podcasted about that a lot longer than I podcasted about React Native.
So on React Native comes with two built-in ways of doing animations. It has the animated API, which is fairly low level and lets you have like really strong control over the animations via interpolation. And then it also has a more automatic way of doing animations called layout animation, which is great for adding and removing elements from the screen. And I would have loved to use that just because it takes a lot of trouble out of life. But I ended up going with this library by PopMotion called React Native Pose. Are you guys familiar with Pose? Really interesting library that basically gives you Spring-like animations out of the box. It has declarative config and kind of looks like styled components where you just enhance a base component. And that's worked really well for us. I'd encourage people to check it out. We've got a lot of expand and collapse animations for drill down views. And it's worked great for that because you can also declaratively add staggered animations for children, which is a very native concept and it just feels right.
We'll put a link to this library in the show notes. Just looking at their homepage, they make the case very clearly that just a tiny bit of configuration gives you really nice, smooth, natural animations by default. It's like, yes, you can customize things and get something very particular, but by default, we want things that move around in an interesting way. So what you said about spring motion by default totally makes sense with the examples on their homepage.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I like that too, because most of the time you're looking for a pretty standard animation on things for your UI. You're typically not trying to do anything super fancy or super custom. And then if you are, then you go a little deeper and figure out how to do it with the CSS and things like that. So.
Right. Yeah. So that's worked out great.
Are there any other React Native libraries that you found particularly useful or kind of challenges you run across that you want to share about?
Sure. I can definitely talk about the other useful libraries. I actually have a talk I give called my favorite React Native libraries.
Nice.
So one library that I love is called React Native Typography. And they have a set of pre-built styles for native looking text. It follows all of the San Francisco guidelines for iOS. And I'm spacing on, the material ones for Android. And they have a lot of default weights, default sizes, and it makes your app feel substantially more native. And we use that pretty much everywhere. We've got a set of common components for the different sizes and states of text that we use. And I'm a big, big fan of that. For forms, how do you guys handle forms normally?
Formic.
You're a Formic guy?
Yeah. How about you?
I've actually gotten really into React Final Form. Have you ever seen that?
I've only heard of it.
Mm-hmm. It's been great. I used to be a Redux form guy, but it came with a lot of problems and re-renders and whatnot. So I've adopted Final Form. I use it both on the web and on native, and it's been excellent. For forms, that's been great. Ooh, Josh, this might be up your alley.
Yeah.
Are you a detox guy?
Yeah, I sure am.
Oh, yeah? How's that been for you?
It's been good. Yeah, we did it at the workshop at Chain React this year. It was super useful for folks. I still just love, it's just so targeted for React Native that it's so easy to use.
Mm-hmm. I had a little difficult time getting it set up for Expo, but there's a couple libraries that have Expo-specific utils. So once I got that set up and working, we have it running on CI, on Circle CI, using their Mac OS executor, and it's been great. Big fan of Detox. And do you talk about the testing diamond? Is that your thing? Versus pyramid?
Yeah, I'm an old time tester, so the testing pyramid has been big. I have been challenged by others to consider whether it applies in every case. But yeah, like, what are your thoughts on? I mean, these for users, viewers that may not have heard about this, these different testing diagrams refer to like how many unit tests versus how many high level tests, and in between. So yeah, what kind of trade off do you tend to find in terms of which types of tests are the most useful for you?
So specifically on the front end, I won't get into the back end stuff, but I want to know at the end of the day that login works and that, my entire view gets rendered, not just that, a specific conversion function works or a prefixer with a $ or something like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm a big fan of this testing diamond where you write few end-to-end tests, a lot of integration tests that just test out a specific feature, and then also a few unit tests. And I think that's worked really well for a one-man team right now. We'll see where it goes in the future, but I use Detox for that, and it's been great.
Nice. Yeah, I'm also of the opinion that I used to be big on unit testing, but it was mostly because it was easier than trying to necessarily test the full interface. But now that I've kind of gotten more on the business end of things, yeah, I'm of the opinion that you should be testing, doing more end-to-end tests, because ultimately you want to be able to get paid, which is kind of obvious, right? If you're running a business, you need to be able to get paid. And then the other end of it is that you need to be your customers need to be able to do whatever it is they're paying for. They'll quit paying you. And so if you can test that those sort of basic areas of functionality work, then you're in good shape. So yeah, I tend to push that way, and then do unit tests, and so I kind of invert the pyramid, I guess, a little bit. Though I guess it looks more like a testing hourglass because it's all the integration tests in the middle that I tend to do the least of. Just because if it works and then all the integrations are playing nicely, and then I get the unit tests just as kind of canaries, I guess, in the coal mine, right? So if one of the end-to-end tests fail, then hopefully some of the unit tests fail as well and tell me the problem's over there.
Yeah, absolutely. There's one other library I would plug that we use a lot. So part of what EEON does is expose a lot of system lists to our users. So a lot of conventional financial research platforms make you go out there with a hypothesis and dig through piles of data to find what's actually important. Mm-hmm. We kind of want to flip that on its head, where you can tell us, hey, I'm interested in green energy and infrastructure. And we have pre-built lists of like, hey, 25 hottest green energy stocks, stuff like that. And we display it all in a heat map form. But we wanted to make it, really easily digestible and navigatable. So we use React Native Snap Carousel a lot, which is a really great way to get a paginated, performant, and really nice looking carousel component just out of the box. And we actually do that with heat maps nested in it, which I thought was going to be a performance problem because the data in the heat maps is updating so frequently based on the GraphQL subscriptions. But it's actually been fine for us, and it has resulted in a really nice UI. And I can send a picture if you want to put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
The approach of your app definitely sounds interesting for me, who is the demographic of has barely ever looked into financial anything. So like, I don't even know the questions to ask, let alone how to get there with the data. So like, I mean, if that is part of what you're focusing on, I think that could help a lot. Maybe I'm a stereotypical millennial in this regard, but like not knowing what I don't know and how to get on the carousel. Carousel is a joke. How to get on the carousel to figure out how to learn about financial stuff. So this sounds like a really, really cool app idea.
Josh
Excellent.
is planning
Thank
on
you.
retiring at all. So
no, I'll keep podcasting forever.
It'd be too boring to retire, you know?
Well, cool. Mitch, is there anything else that you wanted to get to in the discussion that we haven't reached?
I think that pretty much covers everything I have. Do you guys have anything else? I'm sorry, I know it we did a lot of focus on GraphQL. We talked about backend stuff a lot. Hopefully we got enough in there for React Native.
Yeah, I think we did. We talked our way around it. The other thing that's interesting here is that most of the time we're talking about some focused aspect of React Native. And this gives us a little bit more of a view into, sort of the whole picture as far as if somebody's going to go out and build an app, right, and have a back end that they need to support and everything like that, what all is involved in that is kind of interesting. I'm also a little bit curious, how you collaborate with the other people who are involved in the startup, because, a lot of the problems that don't arise in technology arise in okay, how do I talk to my co-founders? How do I talk to my, stakeholders? How do I talk to these other people who are involved in this thing, in different ways? And how do we make sure that what we all envision is what's actually going to happen? So can you talk a little bit about that end of things as far as, within the business, coordinating all of the concerns, and then, how are you monetizing this thing?
Yeah, absolutely. So your last question's the easiest one. It's a freemium model. There's a pretty generous free tier, and then also a paid tier. Not exactly set on the pricing yet, but that'll include things like our proprietary rating system and whatnot. In terms of working together, the biggest win we've had from a purely technical perspective is actually twofold. It's GraphQL, specifically with the graphical data explorer, because now the other team members can go in and see exactly what's exposed. Mm-hmm. And we can figure out how we want to display that data. The other thing is Expo has just been an enormous help to us because of the over-the-air updates and their client app. So for people that don't know, if you're working on an Expo project, not only can you work on it on your computer, but they have a native app for iOS and Android that actually allows you to preview the app on your phone. So I've got the rest of my team members set up on that app, and I can just push over-the-air updates immediately to their own phones, and they can test the app on their devices in real time. And they can actually, if I'm working on something and we're on the same network, they can use the development build of the app as I'm working on it. So it's been a great tool for collaboration.
Very cool.
Mm-hmm.
One ambition I had early on in my career was actually to build iOS apps. And so, of course, my solution was to start a podcast talking about how to build iOS apps. And so we asked around, we got some ideas, and eventually Josh Susser from the Ruby Rogues podcast put up the idea of the iPhreaks show, and that's what we called it. You can find it at iPhreakshow.com, and every week we're talking about iOS development and Swift and Objective-C and libraries and reactive programming and all of the things that go into making good iOS apps. I don't run the show anymore, but we've got Andrew Madsen, who puts together the curriculum for Lambda School. We've got James Zuber, who's been doing iOS development as a freelancer for a long time. We've got Mike Holt, who's a good friend of mine, who's worked in Xamarin and in Swift and currently does a bunch of interesting work on that. And we've got other people that we're bringing in all the time to make that show better. So if you're trying to keep up on all of the advancements that Apple makes, all of the announcements from WWDC, and you want to hear from people who are doing this day in and day out and talking about it and teaching people about it and doing the work with it, then you definitely need to check out iPhreaks. You can find it at iPhreakshow.com. That's IPHREAKS show.com.
How do you decide what needs to go into the app next?
So the team I'm working with has worked for a long time on financial data projects. So they've got their thumb on the market pretty well. I myself am not a big, trading guy. So I'm deferring a lot of the feature decisions to them and pushing back where necessary on the technical side of things. Just saying like what has to be built now and what would be the same amount of effort to build now versus later. And then we're also doing some preliminary user testing with people that are financial experts and traders, and that's been going well. And I love that we get to greenfield this because we're not limited to anything that's been done before. So we just ask the people who we're testing with, in your perfect world, what would you want to see? And then we can just make the call of whether or not we're going to include it. And, that's the most energizing, fun thing to do right now. So I love working in this environment.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's about all I can think of to discuss. Shall we head to picks?
Yep.
All right. So on the picks, this is not specifically React Native. This is just a React thing. Are you guys familiar with AntD?
No.
It's a component library that is my favorite one I've ever used. And I've tried them all. Like I try to, especially with this project, I've tried to steer clear of shiny thing syndrome. But deep in my heart, I do love the new toys. But AntD is a React UI library. I think they also just have web components, maybe. But it's my favorite one I've ever used. They have a lot of sane defaults, and their API is complete and one I really enjoy using. Very customizable and just exactly what I've wanted out of a UI library. So I'm a big fan of that. Strong plug. Also, technology-wise, for anyone that's working on GraphQL, we ran into the issue of how do you do not just authentication, but authorization to make certain API calls and to access certain data. And this library, GraphQL Shield, has been excellent there. It lets you do declarative, well, not necessarily declarative, but runtime checks based on the context of a request and the actual data of the request to determine if somebody can view or update the specific data they're trying to. So that's been excellent for us. And then if I could do one more, I have a life pick, which has been great. This project has been really stressful for me. So I just wanted a way to blow off some steam. And I've really been getting into racquetball. I play at the local YMCA. What's that?
I love playing racquetball.
Oh, it's great. I mean, to go chase a ball around a court for an hour is a great way to blow off steam, not think about the project.
Yep.
And it's been a lifesaver for me.
Yep.
Very nice. Chuck, you got any picks for us next?
Yeah, I've got some picks. So I missed recording last week because I was running a marathon. And that's one of my ways of blowing off steam, Mitch, is just going for a good long run. So I'm gonna pick that. Just running a marathon or just running in general. It's been terrific, and I really, really love it. So I ran the St. George Marathon, St. George, Utah, and or CES, Consumer Electronics Show, is what it used to stand for. They changed it now. CES is just CES, but I love how they do that. They just decide, okay, now it means something else. Great. But yeah, so I'm looking forward to that. Just get to go see what people are working on and bringing out in the new year. So that's going to be really cool as well. So those are my picks.
Great. I have a few as well. It's funny. One of my picks is a data layer library. So GraphQL, when you have control over the backend, like in your Greenfield project, and you can pick it, GraphQL can be really great, especially for subscriptions. That's what gets me the most excited about GraphQL. Redux has a lot of uses as well, like when that observability of the traceability of the data is valuable. I've actually found myself reaching for MobX on side projects. So MobX is another data layer library. The brief way to describe what it does is it takes normal JavaScript objects or class instances, and it makes them reactive so that if you make a change to them, it automatically updates the corresponding components. I've used it for a few different things, but on this project, this is the project that was doing the audio playback. And so there was Expo's audio APIs. I actually decided I wanted to wrap those with my own object interface because I wasn't sure I was going to stick with Expo or not. And so that way I could just move the React UI code over to another project or use another library and just replace that wrapper. But once I got done with that wrapper, I realized, hey, like this is not just stateless functions to call. There's state in there, like the playback state, that I want to update the app on. And so with MobX, rather than having to move things into a state layer and add funcs or something and kind of think through that, in this case, it was very natural just to drop in MobX, take this, audio playback object that I had and just add some reactivity to it, tag some properties as updatable, tag my components as observing for these changes. And it was super, super easy to use. So MobX is neat as just a very different way to think about state management. It's very unopinionated, so not as convention-based as Mitch and I tend to like and prefer sometimes. But in this case, it was very useful.
So when you were working with MobX, I haven't used it in a while, but I did use it for one project about 2 years ago. Did you use MobX State Tree, or did you come up with your own convention for that?
Yeah, I have not used MobX State Tree. I've heard about it and saw a talk back at the conference. I actually have a MobX library that works for JSON API backends. And so in that sense, the JSON API protocol kind of provides a data layer convention that I build an object convention on top of.
Right.
But yes, I've heard good things about MobX State Tree that may be, in a lot of ways, maybe the best of both worlds of Redux and MobX.
Potentially. I didn't use it myself, but I've heard a lot about it. I'm curious to know how it goes.
Yeah, maybe I can find somebody. I know Jamin Holmgren from Infinite Red is big into MobX State Tree.
Cool.
He might have spoken about it at React Native EU. Maybe I should check and see if his talk is up.
Ooh, can I plug one more thing, Josh?
Sure, go for it.
While I was kind of floundering around on animations for a while, I found this great YouTube channel called Can It Be Done in React Native? Have you seen that?
I have, yeah.
Yeah, that really helped me come up with some ideas specifically for kind of a tough animation concept, which is shared element transitions. So, how do you take an image on one screen and when you click on it, transition it into a full page modal or something like that? And that was a great guiding force for me.
Nice. We'll drop a link to that channel in the show notes. So yeah, the inspiration of that. And I'm someone who has not done very much with animations. So getting an idea of what's possible or like how to go approach it would be very useful.
Yeah, absolutely.
My other pick is actually Twitter, which is interesting, maybe a controversial pick in 2019. There are certainly downsides to Twitter. Interestingly, I'm actually kind of scaling back my Twitter use a little bit in my personal time, just to get a chance to kind of focus on family and other things. And it can be easy to get frustrated if you're not curating your list of people you're following. You can get yourself very easily frustrated. But Twitter has been so useful for my tech career, being able to be in conversations with folks, learning all about front end. Most of what I know about front end development, the initial seeds and links and ideas came from Twitter, and being able to as I grow in my career, to add value to conversations that are useful, kind of make connections. I mean, it's probably, that's where the connection started that got me to be able to help out with React Native's own test suite a little bit and do this conference workshop. So I would encourage folks, if you're looking to be more visible in your career or network, or just learn more, Twitter, when used judiciously, can be very useful in that regard.
I like that. That's a good pick.
Yeah. Cool. So Mitch, if people want to stay in touch with you and hear about what you and your company are up to, what's the best way to do that online?
So unlike Josh, I actually don't use Twitter, but just send me an email. I'm more than happy to talk on there. And I'd love to hear from anybody talking about React Native, Node, GraphQL, whatever. I love this stuff. I love this little developer corner of the world that we live in.
Awesome.
So we could put my email in the show notes as well.
Yeah. And say the name, I think you said it earlier, but in case folks missed it, what's the name of the company you're working with?
Oh, it's EEON, EEON.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Chuck had to drop off just a minute ago, but Mitch, we thank you so much for coming on the show. It was a great conversation. You're working on the kind of React Native app that honestly is the kind of thing I'm most likely to be pulled into, kind of this data level. So seeing the benefits of Expo, seeing the benefits of GraphQL subscriptions and these animation libraries, they're all very appealing to me. I'm very likely to kind of check these recommendations out the next time I have a project like this going on.
Great. That's awesome. And I'm always around if you want to talk about this stuff as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for everyone listening. We'll catch you next week for another episode of React Native Radio.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.